So I wanted to ask you, Douglas, about the media in Britain versus the media in the United States, because you've written pretty extensively about the differences between media in both countries. It's sort of fascinating. The United States, obviously, we have very broad free speech rules, much broader than the free speech rules in Britain. But at the same time, our media seem to be significantly more censorious, significantly more welcoming toward opinions masquerading as objective journalism. Can you give us sort of a rundown on the differences between British media and American media in this way?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm in America and absorb a lot of American media, it makes me value the BBC, which I have plenty of criticisms of. But I do think that there have been several things that have happened in American media in recent years, which have been very much the negative. I mean, I think the main thing is we don't really have the sort of creations you have there of people who are, for instance, in front of the camera and expected to explain a worldview for a willing, waiting audience. Our news programs in particular, mainly because of impartiality rules, you have to sort of demonstrate impartiality, which is, something we go, but it's there as an aspiration, shall we say, in British broadcasting. You can't just go on air and, as a presenter, say stuff. You have to counterbalance and much more. Now, of course, there's a problem with that. The problem of the balance issue in British broadcasting is when you have, and it does happen, you have somebody, I don't know, for instance, it happens a lot on the Israel one. You get somebody from, who's a sort of moderate leftist analyst of Israeli affairs. And because they recognize, the Israeli government, you have to balance them out with, Abu Jihad from the, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, and so there's this weird idea that's the balance of the debate. And I'm afraid that does happen on quite a lot of things. And it negatively impacts our understanding of a range of issues. So there is a problem to this balance thing, but it does save us from, having. What is it I saw recently? Don Lemon starting his show by just saying, and he named I think it was after the countries comment to President Trump. Don Lemon goes on and he says, it's whatever the date is, and the president of the United States is a racist. Like, you couldn't do that in British broadcasting. You can't just go on air as a presenter and say stuff. And I think that has had a hugely negative effect in America. And I think the worst thing, by the way, is this thing of two sides that talk about each other and never to each other. The left says, the thing about conservatives is, and the right says, the thing about the left is, and I just think it'll make things a lot worse, as my own opinion. But
I mean, I've had this experience personally, actually, obviously, being from America and dealing almost solely with American media. When I was on BBC with Andrew Neil and had no clue who he was, and he was just playing devil's advocate with me or taking a skeptical point of view, I had no understanding that that's actually his job, is to basically just play the other side to whomever he's interviewing. And so my core assumption was, okay, if somebody is going to be speaking to me that way, then it's because they are representing their actual viewpoint, which is the way that it works in the United States.
Yes, I had that quite early on in my career. I had a news night once with a legendary broadcaster called Jeremy Paxman. Jeremy Paxman asked me a question. I did, I sort of find it, and he seemed to like what I said, and I sort of feeling rather smug, and he laid into the other guy, and I was actually making the mistake of sort of sitting there vaguely smiling, and Jeremy Paxton then wheeled around to me, and so I said, "What are you smiling at?" and then attacked me on something, and I thought it was a good lesson early on that the presenter's just never on your side in British TV.
So with that said, let's turn to British politics and the media treatment of Boris Johnson. So obviously in the United States, the media treatment of President Trump is 107% negative. There has yet to be a broadcaster in the United States outside of Fox News who voted for President Trump, who even thinks that President Trump is a breathing, sentient human being as opposed to just a bad orange giant with minimal hand size. So how has the media treatment been of Boris Johnson in Britain?
There is some similarity in the treatment. There has been an attempt to pretend that Boris Johnson is some appalling, divisive figure, and so on. It doesn't actually work. I have to say, one of the reasons is that actually, in conservative terms, Boris Johnson is very liberal, and I mean this in a way in the American and the British sense of the understanding of that term. His instincts are deeply liberal in the true classical sense, and he's certainly not some authoritarian figure. He was enormously successful by being elected twice as the mayor of London in a Labour voting city. He twice took that position for the Conservative Party. So he's obviously able to attract crossover votes. By leading the Brexit campaign, the Leave campaign in 2016, and that being successful, a lot of people who did like him or had time for him definitely turned against him. He definitely took the brunt for a long time with the negative fallout that did come from people who were furious about the Brexit vote. But by and large, I would say that he enjoys some better press in the UK, certainly, than President Trump does in the US, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. But one of them is just the fact that the suppurating sore that we've had under British politics in recent years has been addressed now. I mean, I was very, very worried for my country in recent years, much as I have been for America in this era, because it did seem to me that having voted to leave the EU in 2016, we had such pushback, all the same things that were done in the US after the Trump vote. The voters are racist, the voters are sexist, the voters are misogynist, the voters are homophobic. They are voting for an increase in hate crime. They're carrying out hate crimes, and much more. We had all of that before it was done in the States as this massive playback to punish the voters. And I worried that era was not going to end. By actually taking control of the Conservative Party finally and leading the UK out of the EU, it seems to me that terrible sore has finally been lanced, and that it's meant that although there are some people who just want to replay 2016 forever, by and large, people have now progressed through the various stages of grief. And that while there were people who were stuck on the second or third stage, they were still bargaining, they were still pleading. I know that people voted to leave the EU, but perhaps we can beg them not to, or get it back, or... By and large, those people have passed through the stages of grief now and have realized that we've got to make the best job of where we are, whether you were for leaving or for remain. And so we're in a better position on that. And I just add one thing, which is that throughout this coronavirus, it is striking to me that there has been much more public support and unanimity for the government's stance here because it's Boris Johnson. I mean, I can assure you, as a fairly vocal critic of Jeremy Corbyn, who was the Labour Party leader until earlier this year. If Jeremy Corbyn had won the election in December, and Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, would have been his Home Secretary, had told me to confine myself to my house and never leave again, I'm not sure I'd have agreed to do it. I'd been very suspicious of it. I'd have thought it was very personal, apart from anything else. But no, I don't think that is. I think there's reason why we have a certain amount of trust in Boris Johnson in a way that in America, as I say, you just have this totally bifurcated nation still.
So I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if maybe you could explicate for folks in the United States who are on the right side of the aisle, the differences between sort of British conservatism and American conservatism. In American conservatism, there's been this real drive for smaller government, a more libertarian view of society. In British conservatism, what are the animating forces behind British conservatism that separate them on the one hand from sort of the Labour Party and on the other hand from American conservatives?
The truth is that in many ways, British conservatives would be seen as pretty left-wing by their American counterparts. And I've seen it all my life. I mean, there is a very clear difference in drive between the Republican Party, for instance, in the US and the Conservative Party in the UK. Part of it is tonal. Part of it goes back to that thing I mentioned at the beginning of the Conservative Party having for a long time made its peace with the welfare state. And I think beyond that, there's a very interesting question within British conservatism, which is there much more than the economic element of it? And that's something which I think in the States you could say yes, and it's essentially the defense of the amendments and of the Constitution, and some social issues which you obviously, like abortion, go round and round and fight very, very hard on, in a way which I admire the fact that America still takes certain very fundamental issues very seriously and debates them seriously. But in the UK, we don't have those sorts of issues. We don't really have these litmus test issues. I think that that's a failure in many ways. And I've often had this conversation with other conservatives and conservative philosophers in the UK of what conservative thinking in the UK really is. Because it has been hard in recent decades to identify what it is beyond a certain view of the state, a certain view of the economy. I'd say this is something that needs to be addressed, because conservatives took an awful lot for granted in the UK, and probably have been reminded, all of us in our lifetimes, of how unwise that is. Let me give an example. I mean, we have a monarchy in the UK, and this is just part of the fabric of the state. Now, I would say that it's obvious that the Conservative would inevitably be defensive of the monarchy, would inevitably be in favor of the monarchy. But it isn't something you hear people going on about, because it's sort of agreed upon, it's accepted. There are some people who want to get rid of the monarchy. But my point is that we have great institutions in the UK, wonderful institutions, which have endured the test of time. And have provided, as the Queen has actually, in particular in recent weeks, an extraordinary level of unity and really moral encouragement to the country. But I mention that because conservatives don't go on about it, because it's just in the fabric of the nation. And many of these institutions, many things that are conservative, we've just forgotten to talk about. And I mentioned Roger Scruton earlier, who was a great friend and a great inspiration to me. And Roger was always thinking about this. Why is it that conservatives have so little to say about, for instance, beauty, the built environment? What does it matter if you've got a conservative government in power if it's wrecked the inner cities of all of our beautiful cities and put up horrible, horrible monstrosity buildings? I think it was Lord Clarke, Alan Clarke's father, Kenneth Clarke, Lord Clarke of Civilization, who said that if you want to judge a civilization, you shouldn't read the speeches of the finance minister. You should look at what buildings they've erected. That'll tell you everything very, very fast. And I do think that there's something in that. What did it matter to have post-war conservative governments erecting huge tower blocks that they expected the populace to live in? So there are an awful lot of questions which we've just presumed, and a lot of these presumptions have just been allowed to go by conservatives in the belief that, well, at least we've got control of the economy. And that is something I think which everybody on the right has to think about more. Mainly, sorry, I'm going on it, but let me just say one thing. Mainly because it's so striking to me that the left speaks at a totally different level from the right on issue after issue. Again, this may not be the case quite so much in the US, but I'm just so struck by the fact that the left does something like inequality, and the right talks about a small increase in house building in brownfield site areas or something. It's like, wow, that's going to fire them up. And again and again on issue after issue, that's what happens. The left talks to things that are very deep. I often used to talk about this with Roger. Look at resentment, and look at resentment, envy. Those are deep human instincts to play to. And when the left does resentment and envy, if the right just says, oh, we found this really interesting tax loophole that we can address, it's not that you're not doing anything, but you are not acting at the same level. If somebody does resentment to you, you need to do something of equal weight back. I would argue on that one, aspiration, for instance. But you need to talk, if somebody else is talking about despair, you need to talk about hope. You need to counter these out. And I think we haven't done, actually. Conservatism in the UK has been in power, but has done a horrible job.
Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Wire, one of the fastest growing conservative media outlets in the country. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our content.